gang. Yang gang.
Yang gang.
Yang gang. Yang gang. Yang gang. Yang gang.
Folks, we're going to do 8 minutes.
I get to choose? Yes. What a delight. I choose.
Andrew, you've denounced other Medicare for All plans in the past, saying they would be too disruptive. What do you think of Elizabeth Warren's new transition plan? Does that address your concerns?
It does in part. I think Senator Warren is wrong when she says that all Americans uniformly hate their health insurance plans and coverage. That's not the case in the studies I've seen. When you ask Americans how many of them like their insurance coverage, it's actually a significant proportion. And so if we're going to convince Americans to shift to a different healthcare plan, to me, the best way to do that is to provide a superior option that Americans would prefer. I think her new transition timeline is better than saying we're going to do it all at once. But I'm skeptical that some of her funding mechanisms are realistic, because a lot of the funding comes from an elevated wealth tax of 6%. And when the wealth tax has been implemented in Sweden, Germany, France, Denmark, and other countries, it has not met its revenue targets, and it's had massive compliance issues, and that would be even more true at 6% than it would at 2%. I like to go man-woman, so...
You strongly support UBI, but what if
You know
UBI...
it.
No. What if UBI happens and then your landlord raises your rent $1,000? What mechanisms are there to protect that from happening?
I love this question because it's assuming that I become president of the United States in 2021. We pass the freedom dividend. Everyone gets $1,000 a month. It makes us stronger, healthier, mentally healthier, improves relationships and decision making, creates hundreds of thousands of jobs around the country. And then some landlords look up and say, ooh, maybe I can stick it to tenants because they're getting an extra $1,000 a month. If you look at our economy today, there are 3 core sources of inflation that are making us miserable. Unfortunately, there are the 3 big ones: housing, education, and healthcare. If you look at our other consumer goods, most of them are staying the same in cost or getting better or cheaper. What am I talking about? Clothing, electronics, media, most food, cars, all staying stable in price or getting cheaper or better. So why are housing, education, and healthcare getting more and more expensive? It's because these markets are dysfunctional in different ways. Education, the cost of college has gone up 250%, even though it has not gotten any better. Healthcare, their business model is just to raise the prices every single year. Notice how drug prices and insurance prices never go down, they only go up. Housing, there are a number of issues. One is that it's hard to develop affordable housing in many parts of the country because of NIMBYism and the fact that everyone's for affordable housing in the abstract, but then when you say, hey, it's going to be in your neighborhood, then they say, how about it be somewhere else? So what you have to do is you have to put buying power into our hands that would actually make it harder for us to be exploited and pushed around. So imagine if everyone here got an extra $1,000 a month, you're very happy, you're like, wow, that Yang guy really did it. And then the next year your landlord was like, hey, I'm going to ratchet up your rent by $1,000. What would you do? Would you say, oh, I guess I'm paying that rent? Of course not. You would look around and say, wait a minute, is there another place that's not going to stick it to me? And then you try and find another landlord that's not trying to gouge you to the nth degree. Maybe you find that landlord, and let's say every landlord decided to try and stick it to everyone. Then you would look up and say, okay, there are 3 or 4 of us. With an extra $1,000 a month, that's an extra $4,000 a month. Maybe we will buy a fixer-upper and actually make that someplace we can live, particularly because the freedom dividend is portable. It goes with you wherever you go. It actually makes us much harder to push around for landlords. But the goal is to have separate plans in place to reduce the inflation in housing, education, and healthcare that are making us miserable. Because in the other marketplaces, you see that a combination of price sensitivity among consumers and competitive dynamics in those markets actually keeps prices lower.
So
So here this week in California at Saugus High School, a 16-year-old student killed two students. I was there reporting on the ground, and many parents are asking what could be done. Whether is it metal detectors, is it more mental health counselors? Do you think Big Pharma is playing a role in what's going on with mental health and younger children?
Now, I'm a parent to 2 young boys, and my son's school just had its first active shooter drill, and my son is 4 years old. And so you have to ask yourself, is this where our country is, and how can we improve it? I looked at what happened in Santa Clarita. It's heartbreaking, and I'm sorry you had to report on that and see what was happening with families and communities. As a parent, it's heart-wrenching. And to me, we have to attack the epidemic of gun violence at every level. So you start at the top with common sense gun laws that most Americans at this point should have been passed years ago with breaking the stranglehold of the NRA. But in this particular case, some of those laws would not have influenced this particular shooting, because this was not an assault weapon. This was not someone who's going to run afoul of a background check. I don't believe this particular individual had any record to speak of. And so then you have to go deeper. What is the chain of events that leads to gun violence? The last steps are procuring a gun and then using it, which are terrible, tragic steps. But we all know that there are many steps that happen beforehand, including in this case. So I'm talking about what's going on in families, what's going on in schools, what's going on in communities. And we have to face facts that 96% plus of the shooters we're talking about are boys or men. We have a massive failure in our society to help turn our boys into strong, healthy men. And as a parent to 2 boys, I see this, and I can see that having the wrong boy in the wrong school can lead to tragic outcomes, generally for the boy and his family, but every once in a while those outcomes can become externalized and tragic to others. So we have to try and rebuild from the ground up our families, our schools. We have to make our schools so they're not assembly lines with these standardized tests that kids all feel like they're just on an assembly line moving forward. They're just like an interchangeable widget. We have to have an education system that treats our kids as individuals who learn differently, who might be at different stages, that they're not all going to be at the same point in their development at age 12 or 13 or 14. And this is a very high bar for schools. Most schools right now do not have the expertise or resources to be able to help our kids, boys in particular, manage some of these issues. And that's what we can influence that might have helped prevent this particular tragedy. I would invest in social and emotional learning in every school, in managing technology, because one of the things that we also do not talk about is that the mental health crisis among young people is hand in hand, is lockstep with smartphone adoption and use of social media apps. And as a child, I was a very shy, introverted kid, but when I went home and I shut the door, my classmates were not in the room with me. You know what I mean? It's like you shut the door and then you could read a book and get lost in your own world, and it's not like you have to worry about what people are thinking about you or saying to you. But our kids today, their peers are with them everywhere they go. So the way we prevent this tragedy, we start with the guns, yes, but we have to go deeper and start trying to reconstitute our families, our schools, our approach to mental health, our approach to our educational system, and our approach to technology, particularly in the hands of kids, minors, and teenagers. Woman, yes.
Thank you. Laura Moraine from Long Beach Life. So the only candidate I've been hearing talk about this, the ERA, was Kamala Harris. So what would you do as president to help push that through?
The Equal Rights Amendment should have been law. And the fact that it's not, I actually had to look up and say, wait a minute, we actually don't protect equal rights for people of different sexual orientation. Like I assumed that we actually had done that quite some time ago. So I'm 100% aligned with the fact that we need to make it a law, and I would make it a top priority as president. I think that we should do a number of things with the Supreme Court in particular. Number one, we should have term limits for Supreme Court justices. At this point, there is no reason why we are following a centuries-old practice of lifetime appointments. When the Constitution was written, people did not live as long as they do now, and Supreme Court justices actually step down all the time for any of a number of reasons. They did not have that post until literally they were at death's door. And number two, I would look at expanding the Supreme Court, because that would actually help depoliticize it. If you have 18-year terms and a larger bench, then instead of feeling like you're putting a Supreme Court judge in place that's going to have an impact for 30 years hence, you're rotating one off every 2 years and then our laws can evolve more with our society and with the times.
Last question.
Andrew.
I like this man's attitude.
Thank you so much. I started the Yang cheer too, by the way.
I appreciate that.
No problem.
So no, you start the Yang cheer.
You get a question.
You get the question.
All right. So a lot of progressives love a lot of your economic ideas. However, some of us are very concerned when it comes to foreign policy.
Some of us, that's good, man.
Some of us are when it comes to foreign policy. Let's just take Bolivia, for instance. Would you call it a coup as well?
I'm going to outline some of my foreign policy principles to give you a sense of where I am. I've signed a pledge to end the forever wars. We should not be in a constant state of armed conflict as we have been for the last 18 years. In our Constitution, it does not say that it's in the president's capacity to even declare war. It says it's an act of Congress. But Congress has ceded that responsibility to the executive branch for the last 18 years, and that's not the way it should be. If we do intervene militarily, there's a three-part test. You can call it the Yang Doctrine. Number one, there has to be a vital national interest at stake, or we can avert humanitarian catastrophe. Number two, there's a clear and defined timeline for how long our troops will be in the theater and in harm's way. And number three, there are allies and partners that are willing to join us in the mission. If those three things are in place, then I would consider military action. And that gives you a sense of how my progressive priorities apply internationally. The reason why I think we are suffering so much under President Trump, if you look at the order of operations, our strength abroad reflects how we're doing at home. We are falling apart at home. We elected a narcissist reality TV star as our president. He is now an erratic and unpredictable foreign policy leader. Our allies are looking around saying, what the heck happened to the United States? So how do we come back from this? We become stronger and more whole at home. And then we go to our partners and say, America is back. We're going to have a sustained and reliable foreign policy set of priorities that you can actually rely on over the long haul. I think it was James Mattis who said, if we invest less in diplomats, we have to invest more in ammunition. And that's not a dove, that's the former Secretary of Defense. We need to invest more in diplomats and less in ammunition. All right, guys. Handsome Zach says, wait, I got a question on climate change, sorry.
Climate change, yeah.
Yeah, sure. What was it?
Was Bolivia a coup? Bolivia a coup? Climate catastrophe right now. We wanted to know, you plan to ban fracking, and on your first day in office, will you make sure that the United States starts working on 100% clean energy, preferably without nuclear?
I released a fairly extensive climate change platform about, 3-4 weeks ago. It includes the fact that we have to move on from subsidizing fossil fuel industries who benefited from tens of billions of dollars in subsidies and turn those funds and subsidies to solar, wind, renewable source of energy. We should tax carbon and pollution immediately. One of the big problems in American life today is that there are these negative externalities that companies don't pay for and we all pay for. And if you think about the cost of climate change, what is that in dollar terms? Trillions of dollars, millions of lives. If we have the companies who are polluting actually pay a price for that, then we would change their incentives and generate hundreds of billions in new revenue that we could then apply to solving the problem. The tough truth of this is that the United States of America only accounts for about 15% of global emissions. So even if we were to very aggressively move in a more renewable direction, if the other 85% is rising, then the Earth will continue to warm. And we're already at the point of no return in many respects. What's happening in the rest of the world is that China is going to developing countries and saying, hey, great news, I've got a power plant for you, it burns coal. And then what does that country say? Great, because they just want energy as cheaply as possible. So if we're going to curb those emissions, what we have to do is be at that table and say, instead of taking that coal-burning power plant from the Chinese, you should take these solar panels or these wind turbines, and we will subsidize them to a point where they're actually cost competitive and a no-brainer for you. We also have to start investing in protecting our communities. We already have climate refugees in the United States of America. I was in New Hampshire because I'm running for president, so you go to New Hampshire a lot. And in Portsmouth, there's a shrimping business that went from millions of dollars to zero because all the shrimp died. And the houses and buildings that are on that shoreline have started flooding regularly. So this is no longer speculative, this is with us right now. And instead of leaving Americans to their own devices to try and protect themselves from climate change, we should be investing tens, hundreds of billions of dollars right now to make our communities more resilient to the ravages of climate change. If we spend the money now, we'll actually save money. The current American approach is to wait until the disaster happens and then try and clean it up. And that is not what you want to do with climate change. Here in California, you're seeing it with the forest fires that are dislocating tens, hundreds of thousands of people, costing lives. Those forest fires are not an act of God. They're the result of the fact that climate change has made all of the underbrush in the forests tinderboxes, and we do not have the government resources to actually manage the hazards over time. We're actively managing less than 10% of US forest land and clearing it of underbrush that would eventually cause fires that then end up spreading very, very quickly and wildly. So this is not an act of God, this is a failure of government. We need to dramatically improve our approach to forest management and make it so that we don't have forest fires and wildfires here in California year-round. So it's an existential crisis that we need to rise to the occasion for. There's a proverb that says, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. We should have done this 20 years ago, but as president, I will do it now. Thank you.
Thank you. Yang gang. Andrew. Eric, can I get a? Thank you. You guys have a signal? Something to sign? Hey, thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Andrew. Do you guys have a pen that you can sign this?
Oh yeah, sure thing. What do I got? I must have a. That's really nice.
It really is. Yeah, thank you.
I love the gold. Got a pen? How do I not have a
You need a pen? I have a pen, but not a Sharpie. Look at this.
Any
Look at
questions
this.
from them directed towards him, I would like to answer them for him. I am now his spokesman.
Yeah. Well, you want to come with me to the mic? You want to do a buddy conference? Yeah. I'll just stand there just so we get the visual.
You could be my
but I want to sign this.
Yeah. I'll find you a Sharpie.
We'll find him a Sharpie.
I'll walk with you guys. Yeah, I'll walk
Coming
with you
over,
guys.
Corey. We're just gonna. Oh my gosh, have fun.
This is awesome. Thank you guys. You guys are doing awesome. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cory Booker.
That's like the days when your opening act is.
I've known this man for a long time, and it's a privilege to consider you a friend.
Thank you very much.
What's your favorite thing about Booker?
Hold on. Let me just tell you, this is a true promise that was made. He said that if either of us go to the White House, we will both shave our head.
You do make it look good.
So, give it up for the press corps.
Yes.
Thank you.
This is the Yang Gang. On your friends list.
Hello, everybody.
Is already on your wall. Yeah, will you take a selfie with me?
Of course.
Jets or Giants? I'm really bad at this. I'm going to do it.
You're doing a hell of a job, John. Thank you so much, man. You guys are rocking it.
All right, but we gotta go. I still gotta sign this.
I'll walk with you guys. I'll walk with you.
Taking your campaign seriously.
Well, you know, it's all fun and games until Andrew Yang passes you in the polls.
Wow, look at you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Zach.
Of course, guys.
Eric.
Oh yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, Silver.
Thank you,
It
sir.
shows up.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much. for the
Ivan.
support.
Thank you. I've been with you a couple times. Thank you guys.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you
Thanks,
guys.
Ivan. Sorry, I didn't remember Ivan.
No, it's all right.
I'll remember you now, though.
All right, cool. Thank you guys.
Owner, walk. I'll send you the code.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Ivan.
Thank you.